We should be connecting. Okay. Oh, got it. Okay, let me see if there's anybody else. Oh, well, here comes Juan. Good. Okay, so I have 13, I have 11. So,
Hello,
hey Juan, thanks for coming in. Okay, I'm going to try to get some of the others on. In the meantime, I think Francisco, we should just forge ahead. I mean, we're planning, so. So I will
share my screen.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Do I have to do that? Yeah. Boy, hold on. Shoot. What did I?
I think you shared your screen, maybe.
I know I did. I'm sorry. Wow, I'm out of sorts. I apologize. Share your screen. Multiple. Okay, there you go.
Perfect.
Okay, we don't have the minutes from, just as an FYI for everybody, we don't have the minutes yet from the February meeting, so we'll have them for April along with these minutes, and we can take care of them then. Okay, I will turn it over to Francisco, and we can talk about some of the things that we were just chatting about before we got started.
And so I take it you can all see my screen, and is it in presentation mode as well?
No, it's not in presentation mode.
Okay. All right, I need to make an adjustment. How about now?
Yes, you're good.
That worked.
Yep.
Okay. All right, welcome to what is, believe it or not, our 16th meeting. And I realize it's a really lovely afternoon, and I've got good news for you, because I don't think we have a very long meeting this afternoon, but it is a very important meeting. We really need your feedback, just to make sure we're moving in the right direction. And a lot of this is related to how we're organizing the plan and what it looks like. And really, we're going to look to you to tell us whether or not we're on the rails or not with this. And to some extent, we'll also look to you to weigh in on some of the recommendations of the plan. We'll start to get into goals and strategies and action items as well. So let me walk you through this evening's agenda. We will first review the recommended plan format. I'll show you what I mean by that. It means, what sheet size, what orientation, what kind of graphic design, what style of plan are we talking about? It's outlined, how we organize the plan's content. We will revisit the themes that we discussed at last month's meeting and talk to you about how we plan on using those in the plan. And then we'll get into goals and strategies for 2 of our plan topic areas. And we've got 6 topic areas in total that we are as of now organizing the plan around. And we'll tackle 2 of them at a time at each meeting over the next 2 months, including 2 this evening. And we'll talk about our next steps. So for the plan's organization, revisiting our outline, we talked a little bit about this last meeting, but the plan will have 4 main sections. The first will be an introduction, why the plan, what is the purpose of this process, and what are some of the trends that have occurred in Danbury. And we have month by month walk through all that information. And we are going to crystallize that into something that tells a story about where Danbury's come from over the past 10 plus years, and likely where it's headed, and what sort of actions are necessary in the part of the city to guide it in the direction that's favorable to its residents. We will then get into sections or chapters dedicated to specific topics such as mobility, natural resources, land use, economic development, housing, these very familiar topics to you. The plan will also include an implementation plan where it's really a summary. We will, throughout the document, throughout those topic sections, we will introduce strategies and recommendations, and we'll gather all of those up from the document, organize them in one place, and get into much more detail about who is responsible for seeing through some of those strategies, what sort of time frame, what is the sense of urgency or the priority level. And we'll put that all in one place. It'll make it easy to find the information, to cross-reference, to use as a checklist type document. And then finally, the appendix is where, I use the term, we show our work, we show our homework here. And that is where we'll provide our summary from all of the outreach that we've done, as well as more of the data and some of the maps and all of the information we've gathered over this past year or so. And so that we don't bog down the front of the document and make it hard to use. We're not going to stuff it all in there. But we'll put it at the back in case someone really wants to reference and dig into some specific information. We'll have it there. That way, the front half of the document works almost like an expanded executive summary. You can get to the information quickly. You can actually read through it front to back, and it'll hopefully all make sense together. And it'll help the reader understand where the city wants to go, and to do so in a way that has the information accessible. Any questions on that? And I realize you need to see how this lays out. So we'll get into a little bit of that this evening. This is something we'll be working towards over the next couple of months as well. All right, any questions? Okay. So a little more detail on the outline. Within the introduction, we'll talk about the process of developing the plan, how we went about that, the role of the plan, how it's used, what's it for. We'll provide an overview of where Danbury is today, its population, some other basic demographics and statistics. We'll introduce how the plan is organized. We'll lay out the plan vision and discuss the themes and how those themes are applied throughout the plan or referenced. And then we'll move to the topic sections, and we'll have one dedicated for each of these 6 topic areas. And we're trying to logically organize related content. So mobility is a thing of its own. There is some overlap with infrastructure, so we'll tackle all the mobility related infrastructure in that section, and all the sewer and water type infrastructure we'll address in service and facilities. Housing, of course, will be inclusive of affordable housing, and we have an ongoing affordable housing plan that we'll reference in that housing section. Economic development, land use, and environmental resources will include open space map. Services and facilities will include all the services the city provides. In addition to that, it's buildings, it's outdoor facilities, sewer and public water service areas. That information, those maps would be there. And then cultural resources, which is inclusive of historic resources in addition to all the rest of the cultural resources. We have some flexibility on the order of those sections. It doesn't need to be in this order. This is how we're working through it. We may find that we may or may not reshuffle some of this to just best tell the story. And there's no need for it to be in any particular sequence at this point. Then the implementation summary, which I discussed. The future land use map, I think right now we're leaning towards having that be its own section, and really this only requires a few pages, if that. But that's a really important map, and we build up to that map. That map requires us to make all of the decisions leading up to it with respect to infrastructure and land use and housing. Because the future land use map is really the foundation for your zoning. And there we take the map of the city, we identify areas where conservation should be prioritized, areas that are where commercial uses or mixed use should be prioritized, areas where housing should be concentrated or expanded. So that map will play a very important role in the plan. And then finally, I talked about the appendix. We'll make sure we provide the balance of the information that the state requires of us within the appendix. Okay, on the subject of themes, we talked quite a bit about these themes at our last meeting. And as a reminder, where these themes came from was as my team was looking back, as we were looking back on all of the outreach work that we've done to date, whether that's survey, the workshops, focus group meetings, interviews we've held, discussions with you. There were words or ideas that were common throughout or kept coming up. We crystallized those. We got down to about a list of 9. We could have had more. We could have probably trimmed this down to a little less. But we arrived at a list of 9. And we feel like this, if we were to summarize the guidance that we received from all the stakeholders into 9 words, I feel like this is what it would be. This is the direction that we've been given for the plan. And that is laid out here in alphabetical order: adapt, connect, expand, focus, improve, invest, partner, promote, protect. And what we've done is we provided a brief description in there of basically what it means. What do we mean by that? And so what we want to do is, throughout the course of the plan, in our recommendations, we want to reference back to the themes. And we want to use these themes almost to evaluate some of the plan's recommendations. If you think of these themes as checkboxes, and we take a look at a recommended strategy, we would ask ourselves, well, how effective is that strategy going to be in responding to what residents and stakeholders told us is important to them? And we could almost check these boxes. Well, this strategy, it definitely responds. It definitely involves adapting, and it definitely involves improving, and it definitely involves connecting. And we might check those boxes. And that will guide us in prioritizing strategies, maybe giving us an idea of which recommendations are more urgent than others, or maybe which ones should have the most resources committed to them. We've used a lot of tools like this in other communities. Sometimes we call them guiding principles. Other times we call them lenses. And in this case, we've gone with the idea or the concept of themes. This isn't the only way to do it. And if you still have thoughts otherwise as to whether we should be using different terms, fewer terms, whether we should call it something else, we're still receptive to that. It's not too late to make those decisions. And I would say over the next 2 months, this is still all open for discussion. But this is the premise we're moving forward with. Okay, any questions or comments on that, this idea? Okay. So how does this all work together? And we've got a lot of terms here that we've used. And that starts with the vision and goes back to what Richard was saying just before we started the meeting, is what are we working towards? What is the big idea? What is the vision? And so we've had a vision statement that we have crafted over the past year. And the last time we spoke, you were all comfortable with it, our last meeting. So I'm not revisiting it here this evening, but we can come back to it. So we have our vision statement. That's the umbrella for everything that happens underneath it. And all the recommendations that we make, we want to check against that vision statement to ensure that they're contributing to or consistent with it. And then we're going to take the plan itself, and as I mentioned, we'll approach it or break it down into topics that we could focus on. Within each of those topics, we will establish a primary goal. And at this point, we are working with one primary goal in support of each of these main topics. We may or may not find that we need more than one goal, that one goal can't capture everything it is we want to achieve. In which case we could add goals. Right now we're working, the model we're using is one big goal. And as a reminder or as a refresher for everyone on what a goal is versus a strategy versus an action. The goal is what you're aiming for, is what you would like to achieve. It's where you want to go. The strategy is how you get there. And a strategy really bundles together actions that are the steps you take to get there. So strategies and actions are really very similar. A strategy is really a collective or a bundle of actions. So if you think of a rope or a string, a rope is a wound tight of lots of strings, and all those strings are the actions, and that rope is the strategy. And you pull on that rope to get towards your goal. And that's how this all comes together. We can keep breaking these things down, and we're only going to be able to go so far into this process before we can only go so far, because you really have to get these things started to uncover or understand what the next steps are, what next steps may be necessary, what actions may be necessary. But we want to lay it out far. We want to lay out enough to get the city started and to move forward as far as we can reasonably foresee. So as I mentioned, we will have multiple strategies that work towards the goals, and each strategy will be comprised of a number of actions. And each of those actions could probably be broken down into additional actions or could lead to more actions. And we're going to do our best to capture all of that into this plan. Now, the themes are out there on the side of those strategies and actions. And we want to understand how each of those strategies and actions responds to the themes, responds to what people told us is important. And so that's how this all comes together. There is one term that I'm not using here that I think you're all familiar with. It's very much related to goals and strategies, and that word or term is objectives. An objective is a metric. It's a measurable. And an objective is typically used as part of a goal. And by example, affordable housing in Connecticut. Connecticut's told us, as defining an objective of 10% affordable housing for its communities as part of the goal of providing more affordable housing to all its residents. We may choose to identify some objectives. The downside of identifying objectives is that it's really difficult to pinpoint a number that is reasonable to achieve. And the other downside of it is that if you come up short on achieving a specific number, it really can make all of the efforts building up to that, even if you didn't achieve it and you made progress, feel like failure, that you didn't reach the objective. The other way it could work is that you hit the objective and you're still making great progress, and someone says, hey, we already hit our objective here. Why are we still focusing on this? So there's a lot of downsides to attaching fixed numbers. In some ways, it's a bigger commitment, but in other ways, it can really tie your hands. That being said, we don't want to take it off the table. It may be that we identify some important objectives for some of these goals that we can highlight in the plan, but I don't think we need to do that universally for every goal within the plan. Any questions? Okay, either I'm doing really well, or it's just way too nice outside and you want to get out there.
I just wanted to interject that Francisco and I and my staff, I mean, we've had numerous conversations about utilization of the plan once it's done. How will we utilize it? How, when we get an application for a zone change, how will we use the plan to evaluate whether or not the proposal is consistent with the plan? So that has led us to where, you know, what we're proposing at this point. You know, I'm comfortable with it. We've looked at kind of other ways as well. And I just think that, again, for those of you who've seen reports that I've written, that staff has presented on what we do when we evaluate, you know, projects and consistency with the plan, or undertaking actions, or grant opportunities, are they consistent with the plan? You know, we need to be able to utilize it in a form that works for us across the board. You know, not just things we do in-house, but things we support. So that's how we've gotten to this point.
Okay, I will keep moving. All right, this part's a little more fun because we're gonna give you a sneak peek of what this plan could look like. And unless you have some terrible reaction as to what we're putting in front of you, we're gonna move forward with this format. Imagery is really important to the plan. That being said, we don't want to use images just as fillers because we don't have anything to say, because we have a lot to say and a lot of information to share. And so we want to be very intentional with our use of images, and those images need to reinforce what it is we're trying to communicate. We're going to be very careful about how we use images, and we're going to make sure we use the best images. That being said, right now we're sitting on a very good but small collection of images, and we're waiting for the spring to come so we can get out there and collect a lot more images that we have a right to use that hit upon and communicate what it is that we want to communicate. So each of what I'm showing you now are some pages that would be section dividers in the plan. These would introduce a section of the plan. And so here we have introduction, and this evening we'll be talking about mobility and housing. So here are some ideas for how we would introduce each of those sections. With the idea being, if you're flipping through the plan, it's much easier to realize when you've landed upon a new section of the plan, and you don't have to read the words to understand what it is that you're about to flip through.
Yeah, and as you can see, these are in a portrait style, not a landscape style.
As far as the pages, the content itself, while we're in a portrait style, we want to maintain some flexibility in how we share information, because we have a lot of different types of information to share, whether that's some graphics, charts, maps, tables, statistics, images. And so we need flexibility with how we use that page, how we present text, and how we place and share images. And so here we go with an option of a full page format, 2/3 width and half width, that we will move back and forth with depending on the needs of the content and the page we're on. So on the left side, of course, is that full page with text, and then 2/3 in the middle and half width on the right. We're also using a few other graphic cues on the page. You can see, of course, the logo that we developed for the plan in the footer. And in addition to that, we're using a color-coded dot pattern in the corners of the pages. Those colors will correspond to the section of the document, and you see they match the heading color. So the introduction heading, Danbury today, that's color coded to match. And that way, as you're flipping through the plan on the corner of the sheet, you can right away see what section of the document it is where. And it just adds a little, my graphic designers tell me, a little texture to the plan and visual interest. It's a cue. We're hoping that looks about right to you. The font is a fairly clean font, sans serif font. It's not a generic Microsoft font, so it's somewhat unique, which will make it a little interesting, but it's very clean, and we don't want to use more than probably 2 different font types throughout the document. We'll use different forms of that font, bold and italicized, different weights, but we don't want the document to be busy. We want to make it very consistent throughout. Not boring, but consistent. The colors we're using, we'll use Danbury's blue and orange consistently. We're also pulling colors from the logo as well, and some other primary colors that work well with the blue and orange. Okay, any comments, questions on the look of the document, the format?
Francisco, for Tim Nolan, for us older vision compromised persons, are there font size that are used in documents like that has a wider spectrum of older folks that can read it better and so on?
Yeah, that's a very important point. And admittedly, I've been guilty in the past of using too small a font size. And but here we stay safely with an 11 point. So it looks small on the page because I've squeezed down these pages to a fraction of their size. But I think you'll find in whether it's on screen at full size in a PDF or in printed form, it'll be pretty legible. And we're very also careful. Another very important aspect of readability is spacing, line spacing, kerning, paragraph spacing. And so we're using a comfortable spacing so it's not too compressed. And then also not too, if you get too spaced out, it can be hard to read from line to line. It doesn't flow as well. It's actually more work, believe it or not. So we try to strike the balance with that too.
I have a question. Is it going to be set up as multilingual so we can get it to the different parts of the community?
Unfortunately, for a document of this size, that's very costly, and we don't have the budget to translate the entire document. That being said, I could have a conversation with Sharon about an executive summary that we could translate into Spanish and Portuguese. So we'll need to have that conversation, make sure we have the resources necessary to do that.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing, and try to do an executive summary if we could. That's a good comment. Thank you, Juan.
That would, I think that if it's that large of a document, I'm fine with an executive summary as long as we can get something out to the different parts of the community.
Yeah. Okay.
You know,
All right, yeah, I'm making a note of that right now. Sharon and I will circle back on it.
Francesca, this is Richard. As a thought,
Yep.
You may also want to reach out to some of the nonprofits where they may have personnel that may volunteer to help with an interpretation of this, or a translation of it, I should say, as well as reaching out to the school district for some help on this if you need help.
We can put it out there. I can tell you that for a document of this size, it's a really big lift. And what is important is that it's professionally done.
Yeah.
Because if you get any part of it right, we could really change the meeting adversely of some we're trying to say. So typically we only work with, we work with vendors that specifically do translation for us, such as for the surveys that we did.
Right. But it is,
And yeah,
to Tim's point, it's, there's a good part of the population here that, we do have to service. And even if it's in the executive summary, that we should be able to give to them in their language so they can at least,
Right.
understand what we're trying to do and be part of the city as we're trying to interpret in our plan that, one of the things we hold in high regard is diversity. And so I think that being said, the translation is very important.
okay. All right, anyone else? One of the things that we want to do with this plan, we're not measuring its success by page size. That being said, we do have, there's a lot of content that we've worked towards over this past year. But we do want to maintain enough white space on the page so it's not overwhelming or too crowded. All right, well, let's move forward. Okay, here's where we're really going to look to you to give us some input. And this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where we identify the goals, strategies, and underneath each of those strategies and the bullet points are the action steps. So let's get started with the mobility section. As I mentioned before, we're identifying one broad goal for each topic area thus far. And our goal for mobility, and there it is spelled out right there, is improve mobility in Danbury across all modes of travel and improve transportation connections to the region. Any comments on that? Anything you feel we're really missing?
I think that surmises what we've been talking about for the last year and a half, that begin with improving 84 through, the traffic on Interstate 84 through Danbury, and then start working out to our city roads so that they work together, so that when 84 overloads, we can move the traffic through our city.
And we do note all modes of travel. So cars, transit, bikes, pedestrians.
Yeah, and just as a way to kind of keep track of things, I mean, I wrote the big 6 topic areas, each on their own sheet of paper. And then if we've had an idea, had a discussion, heard something, want to move it forward, I wrote it down under that, under my mobility, say, bike and ped lanes or sidewalks. And then you can kind of keep, you can see where they all fall in relation to the topic areas. And we can develop, strategies and or actions, to address them. And that was kind of my organization of what's been going on with everything. It's kind of sort of fill in your sheet. So if you want to start to think like that, maybe that would be helpful.
Francisco, did the developing a bicycle plan overlap with our parks and recreation section? Because that's really, I think, where we're going to have the opportunity to expand bicycling through the city, where the actually expanding bike lanes in our city roads will remain a challenge through this plan and the next. So are we seeing that again on our land development use or parks and recreation?
Yeah, what Tim, you bring up a really important question or point, and that's how do some of these recommendations connect to other sections of the plan? and there is connection throughout. And in a recommendation such as this, it absolutely also has its place in services and facilities section, where we talk about parks and rec services and facilities within parks. You could also argue, it has its place in open space and environment issues, as we make a recommendation to better connect open space throughout the city. I expect we'll have a lot of strategies and specific action items that reappear or we cross-reference across different sections of the plan. And this is an example of one of them. So let me go through these one by one. We can talk a little bit more perhaps about the challenges of accommodating bikes in Danbury. I know we've talked quite a bit already about that. So let's start with the first strategy, and I do have more than one slide. These are only two strategies. And you'll notice that we're experimenting with the color coding system. Those little colored boxes relate to a theme. And I don't know if we'll use this symbology in the plan or if we'll reserve that for the implementation section. But the idea is we do want to reinforce that these strategies directly connect with the themes that were expressed by the community. So starting with the first strategy is improve traffic operations across the city. And that is a strategy that helps us work towards the goal of improving mobility in Danbury and improving connections to the region. So how do we improve traffic across the city? Item one is to remain engaged in the I-84 Danbury project and continue to advocate for those improvements. Now, we realize this is a state project. It's its own process. It's somewhat independent of the city, but the city's a partner and needs to remain an advocate for those improvements, needs to continue to be at the table in decision-making, and we want to reinforce that here. Improve the city's traffic signal system with the aim of reducing traffic congestion. We know the city is working towards improving traffic signal technology and updating this infrastructure, and we want to make sure we say that here. And these recommendations that we're identifying are the starting point. We're going to get this all down, and then we need to share it with various departments, boards, and commissions. And we expect people are going to add to this list or maybe refine it. And however, before we share it with people and bodies outside of this committee, we want to ensure that you are all on board with it. And then we'll take it, we'll circulate it with departments and other commissions, and hopefully have them add some information, add some value to these recommendations.
Francisco, a comment? Paul Rotello.
Go ahead, Paul.
Improve the city's traffic signal system with the aim of reducing traffic congestion. About 10, 15 years ago, we added fiber optics to the system and computerized it. And I think that's where the city is moving towards in the future, to make it even more flexible and more reactive to current traffic conditions. And we recognize that's important, and improvements can be made and perhaps even should be made and probably will be made. But one of the things that often is not recognized is the importance and fragility of the system. It can go down with a power blackout. It can get hacked, which is becoming increasingly commonplace. So lots of things can happen to it. I would like to see an additional word in there: improve and protect the city's traffic signal system with the aim of reducing traffic congestion. Just to keep that forefront in our minds. All too often when we have a blackout, we've had 3 or 4 major ones in the last 20 years. It seems like all the police are given traffic control duties when they could be getting people out of elevators and things like that. And Tim can speak to this, but it just seems like we throw a lot of resources at traffic control during a blackout. And we're not even talking about getting hacked. If that system was a little bit more hardened, and we didn't have to worry about hacking or worry about it as much. We didn't have to worry about losing power because it's power dependent now from the grid. It's on the grid. We can take some of it off the grid with battery, solar power, things like that. Some of these major intersections, if they kept operating even during some sort of a disaster, it would be unbelievably helpful to the management of the city.
Tim, anything you want to respond to or add to that?
No, I agree completely.
Well,
During a
let's document
blackout,
that now. I'm going to go into working mode here so I can make edits as you all weigh in.
no, Paul was pretty clear to protect. As you know, 10 years after we've gone to fiber optic, that technology is 10 years old now. And, you know, they're moving on to other technologies, which I'm sure are computer-based and would need a firewall. But most importantly, at a basic level, when we lose power in a section of the city, if we could eliminate ever having to have a police officer go out there and put a stop sign down, and that's really just by making sure there's a battery backup plan for that. So it goes into whatever mode is predetermined for that blackout. That would be 100% improvement in and of itself. So I'm sure beyond what I know of what current signal systems are out there, and I know there are pretty powerful ones that under emergency conditions can be coordinated through predetermined plans to move traffic through the city and eliminate side roads that don't have as much traffic at different parts of the day. So there's really some sophisticated systems out there, and I'm sure because they're computer operated, they have to have a pretty tough firewall in today's day. So it's really just determining what's the latest and working towards that.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get it in here.
Hey, Matt, I think you're still on. You're on. There may be also some language from the hazard mitigation plan that we would look at on the same time, actually on the same topic.
That's right, Sharon. And I think actually I am going to be inviting you to a meeting with Vera and Abdul to talk about this very subject matter. He just sent me an email prior to this meeting. So we already have a meeting scheduled regarding the Emergency Operations Center and traffic signal and traffic monitoring capability. And he asked me to invite you to that, so we could certainly have that conversation. But it's in line with what Paul has suggested. It's something that we've been very mindful of and looking at grant funding opportunities for public safety. So the wheels are already in motion around this subject matter.
That's excellent. So we want to reinforce that within the POCD. Okay. And then the third action item was to advocate for state investment and improvements recommended by the Route 37 corridor study, which was completed last year. Are there any other corridors or areas of the city streets that have had plans or studies that are recommending improvements that have yet to be set in motion? I know the work in downtown is well on its way, so we don't reference it here unless you think there's some aspect of the work downtown that we should specifically call out because it is not yet complete or funded.
Yeah, I would say that that would be kind of an area that Vera and Abdul and I would sit and talk about as related to the projects that he submits under the capital plan every year related to, other corridors. So I think we'll just continue to add to that list.
Okay, bicycle and pedestrian connectivity across the city. And once again, this strategy helps us move towards increasing mobility across all modes of travel, which is our goal. Develop a bicycle plan and provide bike lanes and pathways where feasible as a means of accommodating bikes. And the most recent trend is actually low speed e-scooters, the little razor type scooters that some companies are rolling out in cities and that some people are buying for themselves, which you don't want on the sidewalks, believe me, and you don't want those users in a traffic lane either. Realizing, of course, that Danbury is a very challenging city to introduce bike lanes in, which is why we believe a bike plan or study should be conducted to figure out where it may be feasible to accommodate them, whether it's possible in a dedicated lane on street or whether that has to be done on pathways off the street. We think a plan is the place to start. And then that should be followed up with the provision of lanes and pathways, of course. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if I may, I don't think that low-speed e-scooters are a good fit in Danbury. It's hard enough trying to accommodate bicycles. I would be more comfortable just leaving that.
Leaving it with bikes? Okay.
Yeah, no, leaving bikes on. I mean,
Yeah.
the bikes are important. You know, they really are, and they're not another motorized piece of transportation. If the idea is to do something really clean and healthy, well, that's a bike or walking. Low-speed e-scooters, by the way, they're not that slow anymore. They go up to 60 miles an hour now. I've seen them actually on the highway.
Those, right? Yeah.
You know, I think it's for a couple of reasons. You're getting large, well-funded companies trying to break into the space, and they're saturating cities with them, and they're clogging things up. And in certain cities, flat, wide streets, new broad sidewalks and whatnot, they might be an okay fit. In a city like Danbury, I just don't see where they really work. But they would certainly compete like a bike path competes with joggers. A low-speed e-scooter path by its nature is going to have to compete with bicycles. For my money, I'd want to accommodate. I would want to work on accommodating bicycles. And once we figure that out, and believe me, that's a that's a high bar. Yeah. Then we could look at low-speed e-scooters. I certainly wouldn't want the POCD to actually recommend accommodating them before we've even figured out how to do that. Let's hit the bikes then first. That's my personal opinion. I would not be in favor of that. I know the previous mayor, Mark Boughton, was a big e-scooter fan. I don't think it's a fit for Danbury.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with Paul. Having tested one, almost killed myself in the parking lot, but that just could be my my lack of ability.
That's probably not a good matrix for measuring that one, but
yeah,
I agree.
Exactly. He might.
I agree with Paul.
So I would tend to agree as well. So
I think the truth of the matter is they're coming your way through private users, and if you can provide bike facilities, then you could provide, likely they can be made available to those users, providing, they are low speed users, not e-motorcycles, but e-scooters or e-bicycles. And that it's something that can be figured out with policy and regulation. But if you get the infrastructure in place for bikes, then you may have the capacity to accommodate that demand in the future, depending how it shows up. So let's get rid of that language, because we can still accomplish the same thing without identifying e-scooters.
Right.
I do think I am kind of bullish on the future of e-scooters, because they're, for a lot of people, maybe not for Sharon, they're pretty easy to use.
Well, you're still a kid, Francisco. So
that's right.
I'm just going to weigh in a little bit. I'm not a huge fan of e-scooters, but I can see where they're going, and what e-scooters can provide to a population that is elderly is equitable mobility. So when you talk about equitable mobility and how people can move around easily in a downtown area, especially a downtown area like Danbury that has higher numbers of older residents, you're talking about mobility and equity. So, I'm not a huge fan, but I can also see where the future of this is going in the development of personal devices that don't cost a tremendous amount, but help you get from point A to point B within only a few blocks, especially if you have issues with transportation and walking.
But Bridget, are we talking about four-wheelers or two-wheelers? Because when I think of two-wheelers, I think of falling off them and breaking a hip and then getting pneumonia and dying.
So we're talking about, the advancements that I've been watching are akin to 2 to 4 wheelers or even 3 wheelers that offer a wider base and a little bit more safety. So
right.
I'm falling into the future. So I don't think that
Sure.
line should be changed. I think you're right. It should be the way that you've just edited it. But I think when we talk about it, it's the phrase that we could use instead of even bikes is accommodating equitable mobility, because there will be a lot of change in this in the next 10 to 15 years. So, Danbury doesn't have to be on the forefront of change. We just have to make room to change. And that's what the POCD does. It makes room so that we can apply these changes as the world around us changes. So it gives us room to do that. So my 2 cents.
I agree with trikes and quads, especially for people who really can't motivate themselves because they've got mobility issues. But for like two-wheel razors that are being ridden by 14-year-olds who are in peak condition, that clog up sidewalks and wind up being thrown in rivers and that freak people out in parking lots and whatnot. I think I'm not saying they're not coming. I just don't want to encourage their use in the plan of conservation and development. I'd just rather wait and let the city legislation.
I'm not saying we should encourage that kind of use either, but I am saying we should leave room within the language so that we can encourage the right kind of use down the road.
So can we just add to after accommodating bikes in addition to other means of equitable mobility and just leave it at that? So we're not specifically pinpointing scooters, but just leave it to the imagination of what the future will bring. And at least that we will be on the path of thinking in the future as well, without being very specific as we are to a type of vehicle, whether it be a scooter or a bike or something.
If we eliminated the word bikes at the end and use some other term, we've already mentioned a bicycle plan, bike lanes. And I can give you an example of the other extreme. I visited Taiwan 2 years ago, and it's almost 100% scooters, and there's nowhere to walk on the street, on the sidewalks, nowhere to walk in the streets. And I can't imagine that the mortality rate isn't through the roof. It just doesn't feel like a safe plan with scooters. If it's going in that direction, we're going to have to legislate safety into it.
Right.
But from our perspective, I think the phrase that Bridget brings up is well taken. And we're not specific, but we're putting in a general statement that generalizes things. So we are being proactive and thinking of the future. And you can leave bikes in there, but just add a comma and put in, she had phrased it, for other equitable means of transportation.
I'm going to make a note. We have to wordsmith that right. So I'm going to make a note down here about that, and we'll get it right. We'll work towards that. Okay. Sidewalks, expand the city's sidewalk network with an aim of connecting neighborhoods to the downtown and to schools. And realizing, of course, there are a lot of challenges to expanding sidewalks, from the cost of the sidewalks to the maintenance. And we know that. Regardless, we heard over and over again that the city needs to do a better job connecting schools with neighborhoods and connecting the downtown with surrounding neighborhoods.
We also have to work with our existing sidewalks to make them safe. So I don't know if you want
let's add
just the future or if
expand and improve, or improve. Yeah.
Which is also
expand and improve. Yeah, that works.
Or expand and improve. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Tim, could you sort of add to that thought when you talk about making them safe? I mean, you make sure that they're in good repair, or is there something else on the horizon that makes sidewalks?
The challenges the challenges, Paul, that we're gonna face with sidewalk maintenance
Right.
that we're already seeing is really our snow shelf and the planting of heritage trees is the biggest issue, because we will change the look of our urban environment to a plain city, no trees left. Because if we're going to have to remove in some instances, 8 or 10 foot diameter root balls to repair the trees or repair the sidewalks, remove the trees, and then we can't put them in city-owned right-of-ways anymore, or we'll be doing that again in 20 years. So some decisions will have to be made as to how we're going to continue to have tree-lined roads and sidewalks that are safe to walk on. And that's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, understood. I thought you meant maybe there was a new technology like handrails or something like that that was coming to sidewalks. So yeah, that's a constant concern. You know, when I was a kid, we had to repair our own sidewalks. If you had a sidewalk, there was a city sidewalk inspector, and you would get a ticket if you had a sidewalk that was not in good repair. We don't do that anymore. And now the onus seems to be on the city to repair private property owners' sidewalks. Snow shelves downtown, green wards, whatever you call them, should be at least 6 feet wide. We don't have the room. When I clear some of my sidewalks, I literally have no place to put the snow at all. I have to remove it with like a bucket loader. I can't put it to the right because the street's there. Can't put it to the left. There's a hedge, whatever. There's no room. But they have to be cleared. So what do you? And then the plow comes by and it's got 2 feet worth of boulders back on the sidewalk again. So the problems are almost intractable, unsolvable. But you just keep hacking away at them. But yeah, the tree thing. I've got constituents on Pleasant Street, for instance, that are visually impaired, and those sidewalks were laid when Pleasant Street was developed, which was the late 1800s, and they're the original sidewalks. And they're wrecked. And the private property owners have never deigned to, well, at least not recently in the last 30 years, deigned to repair them, because as far as they're concerned, the city trees are causing the problem. And they're certainly causing part of the problem, but they're not causing all the problem. These sidewalks need to be rebuilt every probably 50 years, regardless of what kind of vegetation is near them, but they're not doing it. A combination of recognition that private property owners should bear some responsibility for the maintenance, and that also the city has some responsibility as well, but I think go a long way to solving the problem. But yeah, they do have to be fixed, and it seems like we just don't do that. And it is a continuing problem,
All right, I think we worked through that. We've got some more slides here, so I think I promised you I'd get you out early. We have to date, we have one more strategy under mobility, and that is to continue to address safety issues across Danbury's transportation. Or did I jump ahead? There it is. We got 3 more, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to tell you that.
Yeah. Support the expansion of improvement of transit service across the city and the region. That includes support and advocate for the Maybrook Line commuter rail service, advocate for the return of intracity bus service, continue to work towards the co-location of Hart's Pulse Point and Danbury Station, and work with Hart Transit to ensure the city is providing Hart with support necessary to maintain and expand transit services and access. That makes sense. We realize with respect to transit, there's not a lot the city has direct control over. They're an important, they're playing a very important role in trying to locate Pulse Point next to the station, but the city's not a transit operator. However, the city has a seat at the table and is really a partner with these our operators such as Hart, and can advocate for and can play a role in improving amenities. Take, for example, bus stops, Hart bus stops. It's a Hart bus stop, but it's city property on many of the corridors. Some of them are state. Even on the state ones, the pedestrian realm is a city responsibility typically. So there's a role city could play in improving bus stops. You know, Hart could also choose to fund some of that should they have a grant for that. But it's a partnership, and so there's a role for this to be identified in the POCD.
Just a note, the next Maybrook public hearing is on the 30th of this month.
Okay, I think we're all the way up until we go to press. We'll be working on this wording to, you know, maybe things change, maybe they don't change by the time we print this plan, but we'll want to make sure we capture where it's at with respect to our recommendations as to the, you know, what the city can do and the role that this idea can play. All right, the next strategy is to accommodate emerging transportation modes and technologies. The first item is plan for the accommodation of micro-mobility providers at the city's transportation hubs. And what is micro-mobility? Well, it's a pretty broad term. It can include ride share services. It could potentially include a bike or scooter share. The point being, at the city's transportation hubs, primarily the rail station, pulse point, or a shared location, that there are provisions made for people to catch an Uber, for Uber waiting stand, like a taxi stand, or other types of providers. There are some providers there. I don't believe there's any in Danbury that were like private commuter shuttle type providers. Maybe a service gets introduced like that in the future, and you want to make sure that as a city you're meeting them halfway and trying to accommodate them where they need to provide service.
So can we put the word share ridership instead of micro mobility so it's more specific? Micro,
like ride share services.
Yeah, because what you're saying, you had to define what micro mobility is.
Yeah.
And so I think it's easier.
Okay.
Do it that way.
It's kind of a buzzword in our industry, but you make a very good point.
I'll bite. What's it mean? I don't know what it means.
Yeah, micro mobility, it basically means one step below transit.
So like ride sharing, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
To Richard's point. Yeah.
Okay. I'm thinking like really tiny cars that are automated. So, yeah, that's what I was.
Oh, there you go. That's
like little,
that's
like
probably
robo smart cars or something.
Yeah, when you're swimming in it, it becomes normalized to you, and that's that it's been a buzzword in our industry for a little while now, but rideshare is probably a little more evident.
Okay.
Going down the list, provide electric vehicle charging infrastructure at city facilities, and review zoning regulations and amend as necessary to require the provision of bicycle parking and electrical vehicle charging as appropriate.
Francisco, where would, I don't know if this is the right area, where would we put something related to, and we're starting to do this downtown, but the meters, and Paul, this from the council, going to the kiosks, and I don't know if it's maybe belongs in economic, that you could, the economic section to make fare changes, or something's going on, rather than the kind of the old-fashioned parking meter.
I think this would probably be a good place to introduce that, and we may find that there are other areas of the plan, like economic development section, where that type of recommendation is central to some of our economic development goal or strategy of really encouraging trips to the downtown and making it easier for users and more intuitive.
Yeah.
So let's
Didn't the parking authority or just go to a new system of smartphone?
They did.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we're kind of already there for what we were just talking about.
Yeah. And our plan for downtown is to kind of get rid of all the, the two-headed meters on Main Street, but just kind of sort of to continue to move towards that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like Northampton where you put your charge card in a central location that spits out a ticket and then you stick that in your windshield, or I don't know how
Yeah.
they're going to work. Is it like that?
Yeah, and I don't know. I haven't talked to Debbie about how she's programmed it in, but sometimes you don't even need to do that. If you put your license plate in,
Yeah.
it just logs you in, so you don't have to do
Yeah.
walking back and forth to the car.
Yeah. Well, whatever it is, it's cashless and there aren't any meters.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. So I had two other things. I had moved to, and Tim, you could comment on this, like electric vehicles in our fleet, in the city's fleet. I could tell you, Hart, I sit on their board of directors for the city. I mean, they've talked about, in the not too distant future, that's all the kind of buses they're buying, electric.
Yeah, I think 2023 is the last year they can buy gas
Right.
vehicles, I believe. Yeah.
You have to be prepared to pay the premium. I'm talking to manufacturers' representatives for dump trucks, that an electric dump truck is available right now, but I pay $160,000 for a dump truck. If I were to buy it electric, it would be $450,000.
Wow.
So
Yeah, let's
we
wait.
we have to be in
Well,
the
at
position
$5 a gallon.
for that. Yeah, it's not going to pay the difference for a while. So
Yeah.
certainly move in that direction and monitor the market. I think we should start with city hall vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that, well, in the next 10 years, perhaps.
Maybe.
I don't,
Yeah.
if I may, I don't think this really is something that is a good fit for this. It's changing so fast. In 10 years, the transportation system is going to be unrecognizable. The cars will still be boxes with 4 tires, but they'll be electric and mostly self-driving. Buses, fire trucks, and things like that will mostly be electric. This idea that you'll only get a couple of 100 miles of range, so we have to put charging stations all over town because people won't use them otherwise. Batteries are going to last longer and longer, and range is going to keep increasing. We're going through a very anxiety-producing the retrofit of the transportation system, but in 10 years, they'll have most of the bugs worked out. We'll be looking at this. Look, it's a 10-year plan of development. We can put it in there, but I think the market is going to be so much faster than anything we could come up with, anything the government can come up with, that whatever we put in there will be out of date in 18 months. By all means, put it in there, but it's not, I don't think it's going to wag the dog. I think the dog is wagging its own tail at this point, and doing so robustly.
Yeah, you make a very good point, Paul. I think we should probably point to things that, or recommendations that we feel fairly certain about. I think we're all fairly certain that electric vehicles are going to be the way of the future starting now, really, and 10 years from now, we'll definitely be there. So I think we could feel pretty certain about that. With respect to those vehicles, the range is going to increase, but they'll still need charge up somewhere. So providing charging locations is probably a pretty good idea.
Yeah, but maybe, but putting the onus on apartment owners and homeowners and things like that. So when you're home at night, you can charge up instead of sticking these things all over the sidewalks. That's all.
Gotcha.
Francisco, Helen Hofstetter here.
Yeah, Helen, go ahead.
Hydrogen is coming up behind electric, I think pretty aggressively. We have, there's trucks out there now that are hydrogen generation. Yes, so I was going to suggest that perhaps we just use alternate fuel, and maybe as a more broadly based, energy source.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it may be that those dump trucks, 5 years from now, it's a hydrogen truck you want to buy because it's going to cost half as much as electric and be a better vehicle.
Right. Might not cost as much either. Just saying.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And then the one last thing, and I don't know where it goes, and I'm not sure it's on the next page because I've had a sneak peek at this, and it just has to do with communicating kind of what's going on on the transportation network to the public, and whether it's on the city website or, I know we get kind of robocalls for other things, but just a better way to communicate. And I think to Juan's point, it just can't be in English all the time, because it's really not who we are as a whole. So it's more of about communicating traffic related issues across, to our residents and our businesses.
I think transparency is going to be something that we want in every one of these strategies.
Mhm.
And communication,
Right.
whether it's through our website. I mean, I've been hearing that for quite a while, that the public would love to know more.
Exactly. And we can fill in the, as we go, because
Okay, I've got a placeholder for that. We can build that out some more. All right, that brings us to the last strategy that we've identified to date, and that is to continue to address safety issues across Danbury's transportation system. Pursue grant funding as available to provide safety enhancements at high crash areas in Danbury as identified in the WestCog Regional Safety Plan. There are a number of locations that plan identify that would benefit from traffic safety improvements. Continue to work with Connecticut DOT to ensure that safety enhancements are made to high crash locations on state highways. Adopt a traffic calming policy and implement traffic calming measures on local roadways where crash rates could be reduced through traffic calming.
okay, I'm going to bring up the other buzzword, or two words, which is complete streets. And we don't have an individual policy, although the way we design roads and view roads to incorporate the elements of what would be in a separate complete streets. It is kind of what people are talking about. So maybe we need to review kind of what we have to see how it fits with that, whether we move towards that or something.
And what
I mean,
are
there may even be funding to do a complete streets program, which I wouldn't want to miss out on because we're not recommending that we look at it.
Yeah, Paul, to your question, complete streets gathers up much of what we've been talking about into a central idea. And there is funding specifically for this type of planning and programs. And what it is complete streets are taking a look at all of the mobility needs across a community on its corridors and doing a better job of planning for bicyclists, pedestrians, and transit, in addition to vehicles. Also addressing safety issues related to vehicles because they also impact other users on the roadway. That very often it starts with a plan. Sometimes it starts with a policy that's adopted, in this case by council, would adopt a complete streets policy that would say we are going to form a committee that will meet regularly and advocate for, monitor improvements towards this policy. We will have a policy whenever a road is reconstructed of assessing whether or not a sidewalk should be installed on that road. If not present, It can include bike requirements for bike facilities. And very often it's associated with a plan. So you would take a bike and pedestrian plan, instead you call it a complete streets plan, and you expand that to maybe also look at transit users. It gathers up a lot of these ideas, what we talked about. If you're interested in moving that direction, I think we would recommend as maybe as a strategy that the city conduct a complete streets plan, in which case we'd get rid of our reference to bike plan, and then we'll, within that, conducting that complete streets plan, we'll make the reference to the complete streets plan should assess, should also include bicycle accommodations, and assess the feasibility of including bike lanes and bike paths. And we pull the pedestrian improvements into that. It's basically pulling everything together into one effort and one policy and one planning process.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
again,
to
let me
sum
just
up,
reiterate, it is what the, engineering and Antonio do and Tim do when they look at the streets. I mean, we undertake some of these things. We just don't call it that. So, yeah, so I don't want you to think we don't look at those, the city doesn't look at all those aspects of whether they should.
yeah, really, we're talking about safe accommodations for all users, basically.
Yeah, that's
Right.
what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The state
I like what you've got here. I mean, I like that a lot. With my constituents, an overwhelming majority of issues from constituents are street safety. That's a big issue.
For
Cars
example,
getting hit that are parked, pedestrians, potholes, all that. There's a major focus with constituents on streets for a lot of different reasons.
Again, I'm just going to reiterate, it does open the door for some additional funding from a lot of other programs if you have something in place that, kind of sort of jives with what the state has. A complete street, they got a model ordinance, that whole thing. But if you could just leverage, you could use it as leverage.
Yeah.
If we
state
had.
actually requires that during any improvement to the roads, which is very generally written, that I have to evaluate all ADA requirements for that road and improve them. So that's already built into our requirement through the state. So that's kind of, the beginning of things, but I agree, moving forward by committee to evaluate opportunities so that we don't miss them for the next 10 years because I just redid a road, is probably not a bad idea.
And, I think we see that manifested in the curbless ramps on intersections that you've been putting in all over the place, preceding road repairs like on Park Avenue and whatnot. I think you're pretty proactive on that front.
Well, we try to walk away, like I said, for the next 10 to 15 years, a lot better than we left it. We look at the right of ways. How can we straighten it out? How can we expand it? How can we eliminate curbing to meet MS4 requirements for stormwater? So there's quite a bit that we already do look at. But putting it into a plan that could give us opportunities for more state grant money would certainly be a nice thing, I think.
I'm all for that.
Okay, we'll take a closer look at the idea of a complete streets approach and specifically identifying that as a strategy and figure out how that works with what we've talked already about bike and pedestrian recommendations. All right. Okay, the second half of what we want to discuss this evening is the housing section. And I've got a couple of slides here with, if I recall correctly, 4 strategies that we've identified to date. But let's start with the goal. And for housing, the goal that we've drafted so far, and as a reminder, we're looking for your input on this, is to expand housing supply and housing choice in Danbury and address issues related to overcrowding in the city. All right. Now, our first strategy would be to review the city zoning regulations to ensure that the regulations allow for the development of new housing while protecting the integrity of the city's neighborhoods. We know that both are very important. New housing is needed, but it's really important to protect the city's neighborhoods. And drilling down on that a little bit, revise zoning to allow the development of accessory dwelling units and multi-generational housing, and explore the feasibility of allowing mixed-use residential development in commercial districts.
Again, some of these will come directly out of the affordable housing plan, Paul, that, you know, the other committee is working on, but we will incorporate, the intent is for that affordable housing plan to be incorporated into our POCD, and that will have a number of recommendations as well. We'll figure out where they go.
So that last one would be like big CN5s, basically.
Yeah, well, the mall.
Oh God, don't say that
example.
word. Don't use that word now, please.
Well,
it keeps me
Well-
up at night. What's going to happen to that place? I mean, it just too soon.
Well, let's just say there are, you know, our CG, we don't allow housing in the CG20, and we have CG20 zones across the street from the train station on White Street.
Mhm.
So how is that moving us towards our TOD or higher density when we
No,
have, yeah,
I got
that's more.
Yeah.
Not
I
that
support it.
other
It's a
people,
good idea. I don't know why we don't do it now. I mean, it's, you know, weird.
yeah, we've
The old
talked about
plan
it
was
since
you
our
had,
TOD.
right, you had manufacturing industry and then
Mhm.
the heavy commercial, light commercial, condominiums, single family homes. It was all buffered. I'm not really sure that works anymore. So people don't seem to have a problem living in a commercial district in other communities. Why not here?
And when we get to the land and resources section, we talk about kind of sort of some big ideas related to zoning. You'll see how this fits into that. It's kind of my mad scientist mind going.
We're introducing a lot of ideas here. We want to make sure you're on board, and once we're agreed upon that these are reasonable pursuits, we're going to, for not all of these, but for many of them, we're going to chase those a little bit as to what does it look like. And that may include really in this case, identifying specific districts on a map and pointing to those and saying, you know, here's an example of a district or a zone where housing mixed with commercial development is a good idea.
Right, and to Richard, your question earlier about utilizing one of Francisco's subs to kind of on their, you know, their urban design expertise and we did this in the TOD. What could something look like at 10 stories, Paul, across the street from the train station? Something like that. We may go in that direction. That's
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we'd like to bring some of these ideas to life with some images and graphics that can really reinforce the point.
I think a conceptualized, as I indicated in the email, some sort of a conceptualized drawing of some sort that would depict it, because the photos you have, as we saw it in the opening segment today, you know, would lead one to believe that, you know, this is a picture of what it's going to look like. You know, although we're taking shots perhaps of the current Danbury situation in its optimum conditions there, but I like the idea of a conceptual drawing too, so that at least we can put this to picture, so to say, and have it visualized by people that are reading it.
Yeah, Richard, I mean, the TOD study, if you ever want, that's exactly what we did. I mean, people are saying, I don't even know what intersection I'm on, because they put in, what could a 5-story building look like in Danbury on this corner. And,
Right.
So if you want to look at that, just, go through the website and you can see the cover of the TOD study.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
And we have Goody Clancy was the firm that produced that. They are on our team for that exact role. It is to assist us with some urban design concepts and develop
Mhm. Yeah.
some images that can reinforce the ideas that we're documenting here.
I'm a big believer of a picture speaks 1,000 words,
I mean, just to echo Sharon, I mean, if the city of Danbury keeps growing and the Maybrook line comes in, something's going to go someplace. And my guess is it would be Packweoke. I don't foresee Packweoke Avenue looking anything like it does now in 25 years. I think that's where probably the growth would happen. It's just kind of screaming for it. It's held on for 100 years, but I think big changes are afoot for that particular corridor if the city keeps growing. If it doesn't, if it stops or shrinks, then it'll stay the same. But that would be one place. It's adjacent to the train station, the new train station, and there's a lot of potential there on a street like that.
Yeah, a lot of issues to deal with, but a lot of potential, right?
Right. Obviously, it would be, for the present owners, it would be insanely disruptive. But this is sometimes how cities expand. Punctured equilibrium, nothing, and then bang, and then wow, how did that happen? Our family owned all of Liberty Street, and the state moved the intersection over, and the state took it all. It's one of those things that happens. So.
All right. The next strategy on this page is support the development of high density housing in and near downtown. And so that has two components, in and near. And for the first one, it is our recommendation, the action item is to rezone areas surrounding downtown Danbury to allow for the development of higher density housing as recommended by the TOD plan. So I expect we're going to look back and pull some of the most relevant recommendations of that plan into this to build this out a little bit more. And in addition to that, revise or rezone the existing downtown zoning districts to encourage higher density housing. We've talked a lot about the need for more housing downtown existing districts. That, of course, has to be balanced against the protection of the historic buildings that comprise much of the downtown. So we need to figure that out. So there's work to be done in the zoning. Some that's related to parking requirements. Others, building height allowance is pretty high downtown. So we need to figure that out. I expect we're going to need to add some more detail and provide some more guidance here. And I think the TOD plan did a lot of that work. We want to look back to it and pull that work that was a good idea then and is still a good idea, and bring it into this plan.
That was the intent.
Right. Right, any questions or comments? I have one more slide on housing. Okay, let's move on to the next. All right, the next strategy is improve the condition of Danbury's housing supply and address overcrowding issues in the city's neighborhoods. Increase resources of city departments responsible for code enforcement, blight remediation, and increase communications with property owners, or probably should be increase and improve with property owners and landlords regarding code requirements and the enforcement of violations. we know we have an issue, and we know it's a challenging issue, and that the city is doing everything they have within their capacity, which maybe just speaks to the need for more resources and doubling down. But we know the overcrowding, the illegal subdivision of apartments, code issues, some blight issues is a real issue for quality of life in neighborhoods, particularly near the downtown. And it's a need that remains to be addressed. And we understand it's become increasingly worse over the past few years. And something needs to be done about it. And we think we realize the city has been working towards this issue. Perhaps the departments responsible need more resources in order to tackle this issue.
Yeah, Fernanda, who's out on maternity leave, and I had numerous, and I think Francisco, you spoke to her about it as well, just conversations about communications with the residents about what the rules are, what the regulations are, chickens, I mean, you name it, a whole host of various topics that it's just that people don't know, it's just the culture where they've come from, and they just don't think that there's any difference living in Danbury from living somewhere else. And so there's a lot of communication work that I think needs to be done.
Did we put anything in here about shelters as, under the subject of housing, since it's a type of housing? I don't know if you want to get that specific, but it is a type of housing and something that in Danbury is important to Danbury.
I think the issue of housing for special needs populations
Right.
Will be covered in the affordable housing plan, and then we'll pull that, whatever that
Into that.
recommendation is, into this as well.
With,
Yeah.
And Sharon, with bringing the affordable housing plan into ours, is it possible to take segments of the housing part of our plan and send it to them so they can incorporate it in their plans? So there's a synergy between the two entities working together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's already there. That will occur.
Okay.
That plan will be adopted before this plan. So the thought process was that the recommendations of the AHP would become, and this is actually the state allows this to include those recommendations in the plan of conservation and development, and that can become their plan compliant with 8-30J. So we're just doing that plan first.
Gotcha.
We'll carry them into here. So they'll find those recommendations will find a home in this section, is I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Francisco, Sharon?
Yeah.
Under improved communications with what Francisco was just playing around that a little bit with property owners, landlords, and residents, this property owners and landlords are the same. Maybe you should replace landlords with property managers. Most of the
that's what I was trying to get at. Yep.
Yeah, almost all of the complexes now are managed not by mom and pops, but by professional managers. So maybe, yeah. Okay, thanks.
I just have a question under the strategy with the reactivating Danbury's housing partnership as a committee. For some of you that have been here longer than I have, does that entail or incorporate anything involving like community leaders that can give input into the particular neighborhoods that one person might live in throughout the city?
So, and Paul can jump in too, but actually, I'm meeting tomorrow night in an ad hoc committee with council relative to the continuation of the Danbury Housing Partnership. And we've talked about it in our Affordable Housing Plan Committee about repurposing that committee it was originally established, and I understand it, after the city's 10-year plan to end homelessness was adopted in 2006, I guess. And they've met for several years. The partnership hasn't met. I took over a seat when Dennis left. Since at least 2016, Its leadership is not even in the community anymore. So I'm going to be speaking to the ad hoc committee tomorrow night relative to either sunsetting the committee or terminating the committee with the intent that it be that another kind of housing committee, whether it's this on an ordinance change or another ordinance, be established to handle and promote the work, the affordable housing plan work, housing in general, to promote the housing policies for the city, the issues relative to homeless, because it's not just a homeless issue. It's
Okay, I just wanted to, just as information for myself, just wanted to ask.
And there's a lot of people on right now. I think the way it's set up, I don't even know who's on it anymore. And with all due respect, I think some people are not even alive anymore. So, I mean, it's time, Paul, if you're going to be there tomorrow night at that government entities committee.
Listen, it's my committee. Yeah, we're definitely going to be there. It's the third or fourth item on the agenda, the Danbury.
Yes. So in fact, the chair doesn't even live in the community anymore. So there'll be nobody there except for me speaking. And I've talked to Warren as well about what my recommendation will be to the committee. And so I think it's time for the city, and we've talked about it with this group on the environmental resources and resource protection and open space. It's time to look at all of these various committees and kind of consolidate and kind of look where we are. We're at a different place than we were. I mean, some of them just 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, just to note, the committee did not receive a response from the partnership. So.
Yes, I'm aware.
The benefit of reactivating that partnership is that this is already in your municipal ordinance, the creation of this entity. And it is, while homelessness was its driving purpose, it is tasked with addressing the issues of housing affordability across the city that's already in city code. So it's really just a matter of bringing this back to life and ensuring that its mission is driven by the affordable housing needs in addition to the unsheltered population in Danbury. And then that partnership, that committee would then presumably take ownership of the affordable housing plan and meet regarding progress towards the plan.
Yeah, the state requires the affordable housing plan to be updated / amended. I have to look at the language every 5 years.
Yep.
So there's work to be done.
Seriously, it's every 5 years?
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
It is.
You know,
Thank you. Thank you, state of Connecticut.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we could do like a bi-decade thing where we really do an intensive one and then we do sort of a light one 5 years later.
Yeah.
Because we can't go through this every 5 years. We just don't have the time.
I think it's a
big lift.
Yeah, but it's like, where are you on it? What are you doing? How
an
these things
update.
work?
Yeah, that's fine. But I mean, you know.
I know. Oh, trust me, I know. Yeah, so I mean, this is my list, and I think you've covered basically all of these in here. Like, implement the recommendations of the housing plan, address special needs, downtown density, mixed use parking, suitability of uses, and neighborhoods, code enforcement, promote some creative design. I think we've talked about some of that. And I think basically I had another kind of interesting idea from our last book and our existing POCD, which was to take a look at city-owned properties to see if there's any surplus that could be made available for some kind of housing to a nonprofit or something. So we can talk about that.
I think maybe we want to grab that idea within the affordable housing plan.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well,
Review-
that's,
Review city inventory, that'll.
yeah. Okay, that concludes our work for this evening. We're going to have a very similar type of meeting next month, the same process. And next month, we're going to work through the land use and environmental resource goal and strategies and economic development as well. Land use, environmental resource, pretty broad. Within that will be open space, zoning related issues as well. Zoning is going to cut across a lot of these topic areas. Economic development, there are a lot of zoning work there as well. So we'll try to put things in logical places. And then we will follow up at the May meeting with services and facilities and cultural resources. Where we go from here is, so in April, we'll talk about those two sections, land use, environmental resources, economic development. And then we will also provide you, and we're going to do our best to get this to you in advance of the meeting, a formatted, complete introductory section of the document. So that first 10, 20 pages, whatever it is that I showed you some samples of, we'll get you that front part of the document for your review, and we can go over that at our next meeting. And what we'll do is we'll continue to all the guidance you gave us this evening on these first two sections of the document. We'll refine that, dig a little deeper, add some action items to the list, and start and pull all these ideas into the document as well, and start to build that document. So each month we'll be coming back to sections of the document for your review while we move ahead on recommended strategies and action items that we want to bounce off of you before we write it into the document. So that takes us to May, then to June, July, and then by August we have a draft plan that it's all put together, a full draft of the plan, and we take that and we start sharing it with Commission, Council, WestCog. In the interim, building up to that, we can start to share sections with various department heads and commissions for their input, so that when we go to council, when we share a draft with the Planning Commission, when we submit to WestCog, we've had something that has had a lot of eyes on it and a lot of contributors, and we can feel confident that it really accomplishes what it needs to accomplish. That sets us up to go into the fall with final revisions and refinements to the plan and adoption in advance of 2023 for a 2023 plan. Okay, and that's how it lays out on the calendar. And there we are, believe it or not, more than 2/3 of the way into this process. So over the next month, we will, as I mentioned, prepare that introduction section. We will develop an implementation plan for, and I need to update this language actually, which I will do now. We'll develop an implementation plan for both mobility and housing, which we discussed this evening. So that means we'll take everything we talked about this evening and we'll start thinking about who's responsible for that, and how much of a priority is this particular strategy or action item. And we'll start to populate a table that organizes that information, and what themes does it check off. And then we will also be working towards our next meeting, which includes a discussion of economic development, land use, And our next meeting is April 19th at our usual time, 4 o'clock.
Great. Thank you, Francisco.
Welcome.
Yeah, really good discussion, everybody. Thank you for hanging in there and participating. And I think once we start to see all of this on paper, it'll pull it all together, and it'll be even more rewarding than having participated in this just on a monthly basis. So, so thank you.
Francisco, before we wrap up, could you go back to that first slide, the one with the lenses, those little boxes that
the themes? Yeah, absolutely.
The themes, because there was one thing, connect. Just explain what connect. Danbury will be a better connected city. I don't know what does that mean?
Yeah,
or is that
it
just a
means
placeholder? Unless that's just a placeholder for the format.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this goes back. We heard the idea or the word connect used a lot in our discussions with the public, in our interviews and focus group meetings, and it came up in connecting residents to services. The city needs to do a better job, but also more literally, do a better job of connecting places within the city. So a transportation infrastructure that's working better. That does a better job of connecting people, whether they're walking on a sidewalk, trying to ride a bike across the city, trying to get across the city at peak hour traffic. So we're gonna, once again, this is just a theme that we can link and associate with our recommendations. So the way, and maybe at the next meeting we'll tease how it is we can do that with the implementation plan. What I envision maybe in the implementation plan is that it's going to be a table, and we might have a column, maybe a column for each one of these themes. And as we have a strategy or an action item that is in a row, we will check off each of the boxes along in each of those columns that idea, that strategy or action item directly connects with or achieves or speaks to. And it'll just give us a sense as to how well we're doing in responding to what we heard.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, when I a sign of the times, when I saw that, I'm thinking, what, high-speed internet or something? So it's not that. Okay.
And it
could be that. I got that.
It could be that.
Yeah, it could be.
But that wasn't the point. The point was to sort of interconnect the people in Danbury with services. It's a lot more broader than that. A lot broader than that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank
and it's the converse, because I said to Francisco after many times, wow, a lot of people don't know what we do or what we're doing. So it's connecting what we're doing to our residents as well. So.
And promote, you'll notice.
And promote,
yeah.
And
promote comes directly from what Sharon just mentioned, and it also comes from our discussion about all of the things that are happening in Danbury, and there's really not great promotion. There's not a great single place to find out everything that's going on, and Danbury needs to do way more to promote all the services that the city provides and everything that the cultural community is offering. And so that ties into it too.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Francisco. Once again, great job. And thanks for everyone's participation in this. And we will see you next month. Again, and we'll send around this PowerPoint. And if you have any other ideas, suggestions, obviously feel free, email myself and/or Francisco, and keep in touch for sure.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Okay, with that,
Thank
I will.
you for the
weather.
Yeah,
Thank you much.
I will close the meeting. We don't even have a quorum, so I'll just close it at 5:55.
Okay.
So thank you so much.
Yep.
Good
Bye now.
evening.
Everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Good night, everyone.